Hello everyone, I hope you can hear me well and that you're ready for another SysKit webinar. I want to welcome you all and introduce you to today's topic, Meltdown Spectre. What's the impact on your SharePoint farm performance? First, let me start by introducing myself. My name is Ante Stepanovic and I'm Product Marketing Manager here at SysKit, and I will give you a quick intro into today's topic. And then Frane Borozan, who is co-founder of SysKit and also an expert in the field of SharePoint administration, Windows Remote Desktop Services and Citrix XenApp, he will be taking over. But first let me say a few words about our company. SysKit is a software development company that has been founded in 2009, and since then we have been producing enterprise solutions. We create innovative software for SharePoint, Office 365, remote desktop services, and Citrix admins and consultants. We are constantly creating new and improving existing applications, and even those of you who are following our progress might see some new logos on this slide, such as SISKit Insights and SysKit Security Manager. We have currently over 3,000 customers, and our products, our softwares are being used in more than 15 countries all over the world. And we are very proud of that fact, and we are constantly improving those numbers, and we hope that we will keep to do so. If you miss anything or you simply want to see this webinar again, don't worry. Recording of this webinar will be available as early as tomorrow, and we will send you an email with the link to the footage and you can check it out then. Before we start, I want to let you know that you can ask questions at any time during this webinar in GoToWebinar applications. We have reserved 10 minutes at the end of this webinar where we will try to answer all of your questions, but if by any chance we won't have enough time to answer them all, we will email you afterwards with the answers. If by any chance you think of a question tomorrow or any time after the webinar, feel free to contact us anytime at our email. You can simply go to www.syskit.com and contact us from there. And now Frane will take over and explain everything there is about Meltdown and Spectre. Frane, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much, Ante. Very good introduction. Let me just change presenter to myself and I will select my PowerPoint. Ante, can you see my PowerPoint?
It is visible. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So today I will try to cover these two CPU bugs that were just maybe 2-3 months ago announced to the world. So basically we'll cover what the bugs do, what are the CPUs affected, how to patch your Windows servers, SQL servers, what to do with SharePoint farm, and basically just basic details, and then we'll follow with the patches and what is the performance impact on the SharePoint farm and so on. So let's continue. These two bugs were discovered, I believe, at the first part of the January, and basically this is a bug that affects a lot of the CPU, and the bug was basically picked up by a lot of newspaper companies, and there is a huge buzz all around the world regarding the bug. So we'll try to cover what exactly each bug do and how to fix your servers and what to do with your physical and virtual machines. So this is really a high-level overview of the bugs. So I will try to explain on what is each bug able to do with your let's say, virtual machine or the physical server. So as it affects as well as ARM devices, then this applies on some phones as well. So on a phone or a PC or any of the device that is using affected CPU, we'll see later on what are the CPUs that are affected. Malicious code could exploit the CPU vulnerability to access information on one software from another. So this attack can extend into browsers where malicious JavaScript deployed through the web page, or even add, note, for example, that if you are hosting your site and you are, for example, using Google AdSense or some other provider to provide the ads to your other users, inside that ad can be malicious code. And that means that it could access information and on that same physical system. So it means in another running application or a browser tab. So in the environment where multiple servers are sharing resources, and today this is, I believe, more than 90% of the environments have some kind of a virtualization. These vulnerabilities could mean that somebody can access information from one virtual machine to another. So now we will see what this means for every bug, what are the systems that are affected and what to do about it. So basically there are two different bugs and they are called a Meltdown and a Spectre. So Meltdown affects Intel and some ARM processor, and Meltdown basically affects the target CPU optimization capabilities. So this means today every processor is trying to predict what you are trying to do in your, let's say, session. So when you are doing something, CPU is trying to predict what next you are trying to do, and basically there is a bug in that prediction code. And that means that assume that any running process can read the memory of any other running process. So Meltdown was discovered by 3 independent teams. So there is a team from a person from Google Project Zero. The name of the person is Jan Horn. There is a team from Sibelius Technology. The name of the persons are Werner Haas and Thomas Prescher. And there are multiple persons from Graz University of Technology. So this is interesting because basically the same bug was discovered by 3 different teams that were not working together. Let's continue to the Spectre bug. So who reported first Spectre? It was the same person from the Google Project Zero, Jan Horn, and the other persons are from University of Pennsylvania and University of Maryland, Mike Hamburg from Rambus, Moritz Lipp from Graz University of Technology, and Yuvar Yarom from University of Adelaide. So these are three completely different teams that completely different bugs discovered on the CPUs. So what about the Spectre? Why is it different than the Meltdown bug? Is basically this Spectre, of course, exploits the CPU branch prediction optimization. CPU looks at the instruction series, for example, that contains a decision point. So, for example, if condition X, then continue along path A, else jump to path B, and guesses in advance whatever will follow the else code branch. And, for example, Spectre can be exploited to extract information from other running processes, for example, stealing login cookie from the browser. Let's move on. So what is mostly on the risk? What is affected by these 2 CPU bugs? So as mentioned before, cloud servers are a lot on risk because they use virtualization. For the virtualization, one CPU is shared across different virtual machines, and that means that if that different virtual machines are secured on the virtualization level through the CPU, through this prediction for the Spectre, it can jump from one virtual machine to another. It is also a risk for the workstations. And this is, for example, interesting for the remote desktop session host servers because, for example, if you have a huge machine where you host a lot of different servers, if you have just one remote desktop session host server, if your users are logging on to that server, if somebody executes that malicious code on the remote desktop session host server, that means from that server it can access the other virtual machines and the host memory as well. And SQL servers are affected as well, and we'll see later on what are the patches that you need to apply to the SQL servers. Okay, so this is the list of the impacted CPUs. So the Spectre has impacted the Intel, AMD, ARM processors, NVIDIA, and IBM Power CPUs. The Meltdown impacts Intel ARM chips, and the exceptions are Itanium server processors because they have completely different architecture, and some of the items that were built before 2013. So this is something that is really interesting because these two bugs are around for more than 20 years, and so the current processors cannot be fixed easily because the problem is in architecture. So the software vendors will provide patches that allow us to fix these issues, but the problem will stay in the chip. So they need to change the architecture of the chip, and basically next generation of the CPUs will not have these issues. So we'll be 100% sure only with the next generation of the processors, and now we need to trust the software vendors that patches that are provided to us will fix this issue. So what about the cloud? So this is something that is really interesting because before the bugs were publicly announced, all the big providers, so for example AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, and some of the hardware vendors signed some kind of NDA where they were committed, where they have some kind of a time period where they can provide the fix for their cloud infrastructure. And basically because those public providers are hosting a lot of machines, so they needed to patch that clouds before all this information was publicly announced. So we believe that maybe sometime in November or December they received this information, and they worked really hard to patch the system. So we'll see later on the latest news from the Azure, what they say, are they completely secure, and how these bugs are affecting Azure. As we think, so big guys are not the problems. So smaller companies that do not have that did not have this access to this information, let's say, are the biggest problem, because even smaller guys have huge infrastructures, and they have a lot of servers, virtual and physical servers, and when the bug was publicly announced, they needed to patch a really huge environment in matter of few days. But let's say that today most of the even smaller guys, they publicly announced they are patched, but this was the problem in January because they did not have access to this information as the big cloud vendors. So let's continue with the on-prem environments. So we created a list of things on what you need to do with your Windows servers, with your Windows 10 clients, and in order to let's say avoid these security breaches. So this is a list of what you need to do for each Windows 10 version, and basically what is important is the patches are not available for non-R2 versions of the Windows Server 2012 and Windows Server 2008. So, but what we saw in our experience is most of the systems, so more than 90% of the situations, always have the Windows Server 2012 R2 in production and 2008 R2. So these are the software patches that basically you need to apply to your Windows Server system in order to avoid these security breaches. Okay, let me check if I missed something. Okay, so important. So this numbers of the KBs will be available after the webinar, so you will receive the email so you can check exact KBs and you can install this in your environments. So let's continue with the Windows Server requirements. So in the start of January, Microsoft, so on the clients and on the servers, you needed to add the registry key to the system in order to install these patches. From beginning of March for the clients, Microsoft is not requiring anymore that registry change. For the server, that is still required. So for the Windows Server, in order to patch them, you need to add this registry value, and then you will be able to install the patches on your Windows 7 systems. There is a specific process for the HyperV guests. So you will receive these links in the email as well. So basically, you know what you need to do with the HyperV guests to patch them. Okay, so Hyper-V guests and Hyper-V hosts have different protection mechanisms. So you need to do one thing for the Hyper-V guest and another thing for the Hyper-V host. So here on this link, you have information on what exactly you need to do for the Hyper-V host. So this is something that is really important. So you need to do the pre-install registry changes and the post-install registry changes. Depending on the guest and host configuration, you might need to configure additional registry settings. So this really depends on your hardware vendor or on the specific Windows build that you have, but basically this is something that you need to take care of. So you need to check exactly what hardware you have in your data center and if there is something additional that you need to apply to your hardware to protect them. This is something that is really interesting as well. So each virtual machine must be cold booted. So this means that after you patch the host, after you patch the VM, you need to shut down machine, because when you shut down machine, then the memory goes away, because if you just restart the machine, then the attacker potentially would be able to see that data inside the virtual machine. So you need to cold boot the virtual machine in order to apply patch completely. And this is important for the Hyper-V clusters as well. So if you have a Hyper-V cluster with multiple nodes, you need so it's important to take care about the live migration, because live migration between the patched and non-patched system will not work. So you need to take care about that. For example, if you have 10 or more nodes, this will not be a problem. But for example, if you have only 2 nodes, then maybe the best would be to disable live migration in order just to patch the systems, and then you'll be good to go. Okay, let's move on. So Microsoft announced the PowerShell module that you can just install from the PowerShell gallery, and basically this allows you to check if your system is patched. So everything that you need to do is install module speculation control, and then after it is installed, you run it with get speculation control settings. So it's really easy to read this check, because I'm sorry, what happened here? Let me. Where is it? So it's very easy to check this output, because if something is red on your system, that means you are not patched completely. But if you see all the green sentences, that means you are good to go. So this is something that a lot of people do not know. So if you just install this module, you can easily check if your system is protected. So important for the SharePoint. So Windows Server is hosting your SharePoint server farm and the SQL Server, and there are patches that are available for different SQL servers. So these are the SQL servers that have available updates for these 2 bugs. So everything from SQL Server 2008 to SQL Server 2017 has a patch, and below is list of patches that you need to apply to your SQL servers in order to avoid this CPU bugs. And this as well will be available later on, so you will receive this information so you can patch your SQL servers as well. I want, before I go to the cloud, I want to mention the SharePoint server. So until today, there is no official patch from the Microsoft for the SharePoint. So there are patches for the underlying Windows Server and the SQL Server, but we did not find any patches that apply to the SharePoint. If there is a patch that has something to do with these 2 bugs for the SharePoint, we can send some kind of newsletter to you guys or something like that, where you will be alerted that you need to patch your SharePoint system. Okay, so what's going on in the Azure? Below is a link where you can check what are the news from the Microsoft and what they are doing in the Azure. So as I mentioned before, when the bug was publicly announced in the beginning of January, most of the big cloud providers were already patched. And this is the last March 6th, 2018 update. So the majority of Azure customers should not see any noticeable performance impact with the March update. They have worked to optimize the CPU and disk I/O, and they are not seeing noticeable performance impact after the fix has been applied. A small set of customers is experiencing some networking performance impact, but this can be addressed by turning on Azure Accelerated Networking. So this is something in the Azure portal that is available to all the Azure customers. So below is the link where you have the updates for Microsoft Azure and what they are doing with these 2 CPU vulnerabilities. Okay, This is the summary of everything, and this is actually the real problem. So a side effect of fixing hardware vulnerabilities for the software patches always comes at an expense. So it will be always lower than fixing the issue in hardware. So only next generation CPUs will work correctly. So what we need to do today is to patch our systems to avoid this vulnerability. So there are various reports and benchmarks, and I would be really careful with all these benchmarks, because the first patches and the patches that we have today are different and developed and updated. So for example, some organizations like UK Guardian reported this as the worst ever CPU bug that will affect all the computers on the world, and basically it can cause a performance impact by 30%. But this is something that is not true, because the impact on the performance is really small. And the most important thing is, as things develop, Microsoft, when they announce a new patches, probably those patches would be better than the first set of patches, and the performance hit on the systems would be a lot better than it is today. So this is what we saw. Performance hit on most of the patched machines is really small, so we are just talking about a single-digit slowdowns, and we'll see that in a second how it looks like on the server. So this is something that is maybe important. So the performance hit will be more visible on the CPU-intensive system like a search or really busy SQL server, because the more CPU is used on the systems, the performance hit would be bigger. But if your servers are not so busy, then you will likely not see any performance hit. Okay, so I will show you now how you can measure the CPU usage on your SharePoint farm. Let me just share another application. Okay, so like Ante mentioned, we announced just, I believe, 20 days ago a specific application that is able to monitor the performance of the SharePoint farms. And basically, you can, beside the other counters, you can monitor, of course, the CPU as well. So for example, on this farm, I have single server for showcase. You can see that before the CPU usage was around 2%, and then after it was around 4%. So the impact is really small. So this is something that we would like to communicate to our customers, that if they apply the patches, they will not see a huge performance impact. So basically, you can use SysKit monitor to, the SysKit Insights to monitor performance of your SharePoint farms. So what you need to do is you just add single farm. It discovers all the server in the farm, and basically it starts monitoring whatever is important for your SharePoint farm. So beside the CPU, it looks for the web front-end performance counters, for the app server performance counters, for the search server, and whatever is important for a different role of that particular server. I just want to mention, beside the performance, you can use the application to monitor the ULS logs. So basically, our application aggregates all the ULS logs from different servers, and you can use the single interface to search through the ULS logs for all the SharePoint servers that you have. Ante, I believe that I'm done with the showcase, with the presentation today, so we will start with the questions, okay?
Okay.
So let me just pick some of the questions from the audience. So does it affect AMD server CPUs? I'm not sure if I mentioned that, but Meltdown does not affect the AMD processor, but the Spectre does. So Spectre, so it affects the AMD server processors as well, because it's the problem in architecture. So Spectre allows user mode applications to extract information from any process that is running on the same system. So for example, JavaScript in a web page using Spectre bug can extract login cookie for other sites from the browser memory. Okay. So this is really good question from Jason. So can it be exploited remotely? So this is something that is good about the bugs. So if attacker wants to exploit the bug, he needs to be on the machine. So the code cannot be executed remotely. So attacking code must be directly on the target system. That is what separates Spectre and Meltdown vulnerabilities from the other stuff. So in order to exploit this, you need to be directly on the system. Okay, the other from John. What should I patch? Should I patch HyperV host or the guest, or both? So for fullest protection, you must patch the underlying host. You must patch the host configuration. You need perform host configuration changes. In case your host has the firmware that is published by the hardware vendor, you need to apply that new firmware. You need to patch the guests, and then after all that, you need to cold boot the guests. So basically, that is something that is best for, let's say, full protection today that you can do. So this is a question about the insights. So the question about insights, let me just, I cannot show it here because I have one farm only, but the question is, can I aggregate multiple SharePoint farms into insights? So the simple answer is yes. So you can install different collection agents on different farms or even domains that will send the data to the central location, and basically from one interface you can check the performance or the ULS logs together with event viewer and SQL logs from one location. There is another question from Martin. We've seen some weekly SQL jobs doing maintenance tasks being slower. Any process that does show a larger slowdown, for example, a full SharePoint search reindex. Martin, if you can mention how much of the slowdown you have noticed, because from our experience and what I talk with our customers, we have not seen any big performance impacts. But of course, this really depends on the environment that you have. If you have a really intensive CPU environment and SQL Server is, then you could see some kind of performance impact. So Martin is mentioning 30 to 50% slower SQL maintenance jobs. Yeah, so this is something really interesting. This is, I must admit, I never saw this slowdown, but I will discuss with the customers and check what they noticed on the SQL maintenance jobs. Martin, I can get back to you when I check with the other clients. Okay. Okay, so what about the public cloud? So I mentioned that all the public, so all the big guys are, so the Azure, AWS, and Google Cloud, they have been informed before this thing went publicly, and they patched most of the systems before the January 9th. So probably one of the reasons for that was one of the guys who discovered this was from Google, so probably they had some kind of internal information which they shared, and basically they patched all the public cloud systems. Okay, I believe, Ante, that are most interesting questions for today. So can you take over, please?
Okay, thank you, Frane. I want to thank you for this very interesting webinar, and I want to thank you, everybody else, for being here today. I hope you learned something of value, and please feel free to leave us some feedback. Also, you can check out our previous webinars and see if there is anything that could be of interest to you. And of course, feel free to check out our tools at www.syskit.com. And join us again next time. Until then, goodbye.
Take care.